Georgetown. I've been coming for a couple of years since he's been teaching me about this area of law. Anyway, I'm always so happy to have him. I'll let you get started. Yeah?
Thank you, yes.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. How you guys doing? You awake after the break? Sure. I used to love those breaks during afternoon classes. So hi, everybody. We're going to talk today about land laws among the Gullah Geechee community, my community. Okay. So first, we're going to talk about who I am and a little bit of what I do. I put this first this time, Professor Munchie, because I always put it last, and then people are just interested, but no one knows what I did. So we'll talk about that first, but happy to loop back to that after you see this very specific kind of community-specific case example. Then I'll talk about who we be, right? The Gullah Geechee people. Then we'll take the journey, right, from us being property to owning property, and then from owning property to losing property. Then we'll talk about the Vice News, excuse the slide, the Vice News discussion. We'll talk about divestment or dispossession, legal remedies to that. Then I welcome a discussion to hear what you guys have to say about it, right? If you guys can come up with some innovative solutions. And at the very, very end, I just have a very open-ended request of you, okay? Okay, so who prints the be the we? I am a Prince Albert III. I am the president and founder of Gullah Ventures. I am a 2020 graduate of the Law Center. Did a lot of stuff before then. Been doing a lot of stuff since then. But this is an incredible place of learning, of interrogation, of meeting a lot of different people from all walks of life, from all belief systems, from all different legal penchants, and doctrines, and so take advantage of your time here because it surely set me up for success. Okay, great. All right, Gullah Ventures. We are a full-service cultural sustainability firm that partners with large institutions that are engaging with cultural communities, in particular African descendant, indigenous, and Latinx communities. Okay. What is cultural sustainability? Real short and quick. We define it at our firm as empowering cultural communities to sustain their traditionalist lifeways. That is like chock full of buzzwords we can talk about at another time. Happy to maybe stay a little after and chat. But this is a little of what I do, and what we'll talk about today is a part of it, okay? So, who we be? There are many words people use, okay? You've got Afro-Indigenous, Afro/Indigenous, Black Indians, Black Natives, Freemen, okay? There are all these terms that refer to the Gullah Geechee as an Afro-Indigenous people. I prefer the slash, okay? We'll talk about why in a moment. Because the slash is inclusive, it is a collective term for the legacy of the descendants of both sub-Saharan African people and indigenous peoples of the Americas, right? What we don't want to do is we want to avoid using, oh, you're part something, right? Or, quantifying, right, the influence between cultures, because the reality is that this country was built on the backs of both displacing indigenous people and the labor of African descended peoples, this entire hemisphere, right? And so giving honor to that, we refer to both as both when we're having certain conversations, right? And the term is not meant to be ignoring one or the other, but to be inclusive of both and in any mix that they appear, if they appear in any mix at all. When we say Afro-Indigenous, referring to Gullah Geechee people in particular, we mean just that, right? This map shows, right, some of the, on the left-hand side, you see the western region of Africa and the central region of Africa. These were the indigenous ethnicities, right, that are accounted for in slave records that came to the Americas, okay? In particular, it's the descendants of Gullah Geechee identity. On the left-hand side are Many of the indigenous groups, perhaps not inclusive because we don't completely know through cultural reconstruction, right? But these are the existing groups that we know that were indigenous. And what we know is that over hundreds of years of living in the same places, right? All quote unquote Indians did not disappear, okay? There was an exchange of influence, intermarrying, right? And really what became the Gullah Geechee culture. So again, this is a bigger depiction of just the slave trade elements, right? And so this is who we be. We be Gullah Geechee, Gullah / Geechee. Now I explain why the slash. So Queen Quet, who we will hear more about, coined this term in 1990, either two or, I know it became a thing in 1996. People refer to some of us as Gullah and others of us as Geechee, okay? These were derogatory terms, okay? So there's gonna be an issue in some places where people are Gullah Geechee but may not refer to themselves as Gullah Geechee, okay? That is because these were derogatory terms that could come from a variety of places, right? That are now being vindicated as terms of pride in probably the last 30, 40 years. But what it accounts for is the group of people who settled and evolved in this area of African and indigenous descent, who lived along the barrier islands from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. Islands in the early times, pretty much before the 1930s, right? Going to the beach and sitting out on the beach like we do and tanning, that is like a very relatively new phenomenon, okay? Beaches were not fun places, especially the islands in the summertime. Okay, they were hot, they were mosquito infested. Some of them are like sand dunes, right? So they were like, low tide visible, high tide not visible. Okay, so they weren't areas you could grow anything on until the Industrial Revolution, where people developed dredging, right, and these larger tools to make these habitable places. But Gullah Geechee people found refuge on these islands. So many of the plantations that we worked on were further inland, right, where ground or land is higher, okay? But Gullah Geechee people were given a relative sense of autonomy living along the islands, and thus retained a lot of African retentions, marooned with indigenous peoples, right? And essentially these islands became our home. So now we have today, right, what is developed is the Gullah Geechee Nation, right? The nation had pronounced its self-determination on July 2nd, the year 2000, on Sullivan's Island in South Carolina. Sometimes Sullivan Island is very derogatory, I can't stand this, but they call it the Ellis Island for enslaved people. No, because it was not our choice to come to Sullivan's Island, right? But it is really one of the largest ports of entry for most black people in the United States. Most of us, of the 210,000 slaves over the whole slave trade that came to the United States, came through South Carolina, right? And South Carolina remains really the seat of Gullah Geechee culture. So on July 2nd in 2000, what better place to proclaim our nationhood, our international recognition as a self-determined group that has always existed for at least the last 200-300 years as a conscious ethnic group in this area, but on the place that we all came through. Okay. We'll talk more about Special Field Order 15, okay? I'll jump back to this, but no, I'll talk about it now. So Special Field Order 15, after the Civil War, General Sherman proclaimed this on June 16, 1865. How many of you have ever heard of 40 acres and a mule? Okay. Just a few hands up. Okay, I was about to say. If y'all ever seen a Spike Lee joint, then you know 40 acres and a mule. Okay. This is where 40 acres and a mule comes from, okay? This was a devised plan by General Sherman to actually create in what is now the Gullah Geechee Nation's area, okay, from Jacksonville, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. In 1865, he conceived this idea of giving 40-acre lots of land and a mule to freed slaves after the Civil War in this area. For all of the formerly enslaved people in the United States, they would be given land in this area.
Can I just connect this to something we have also
Please.
seen is, we started the Homestead Act, right? The Homestead Act were what this is modeled after, right? The Homestead Act donated land to, settlers who were moving westward. And so when, free black men were asking for 40 acres and a mule, they were referring to the Homestead Act for newly emancipated.
That's right. And 40 acres was very small, in fact. Smaller compared to the Homestead Act, right? Granting hundreds of acres, sometimes thousands of acres, right? To people further west. So just noticing that it is relatively extremely small compared to the allotments that would have been given to others. But I think the most important thing to know about Special Field Order 15 is that it did not come to pass. Okay? No one got the 40 acres or the mule. Okay? It was revoked by President Andrew Johnson, who was well known for his racial animus. Okay? So it never happened. But I included here to talk about legal recognition, right? That this area and these people were legally recognized as far back as 1865, right, in conceiving, right, freedom and an area of relative safety and refuge. Okay. Then we talked about nationhood, right, and Queen Quet. It really culminated in the ceremony of the election and installment of Queen Quet. And we'll talk more about her later in this slideshow. But really what's important to know is that the nation is recognized federally in some ways, right? And internationally, right? We are a party to the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. We are also co-leading the UNESCO Decade of African Descent, which goes till 2026, and we hope it will be extended. And we were involved in sustainability goal setting, which if you've ever seen it or Google it, it's the UN Sustainability Goals, right? We were part of that, right, and really working with that. So this is not make-believe, right? But definitely this is who we are, and that we have really fought for international recognition to assure our rights and our safety through time. Okay, then there's legislation. I'm not going to belabor on this, but yes, there is a Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Act, right, which was then subsumed, amended a couple of times, and it's assumed in a larger Cultural Heritage Act, okay? What it did at the time in 2006 of its passing, right, was it created pretty much under the National Park Service, which is a subsidiary agency of the Department of Interior, kind of created this area of cultural recognition. Honestly, no real rights, no real any durable anything, but again, there is recognition. And I think in this legal system, all things start with recognition, typically derogatory and then vindicated to be affirmative, right, and on and so forth, okay? But there is a law, it does exist, it has been amended, and it is still active. Okay. I show this slide because I want to show you what we look like, right? Land is our ancestor. Land is God's gift to us. Like I said, a place of refuge for Black people, particularly important now when so many places merely or barely tolerate us. These islands have always been places of refuge, safety, and subsistence for us for really almost 500 years. When you Google Gullah or Geechee people, you see enslaved people or formerly enslaved people, people dressed up in traditional clothing, which is a part of what we do, but it's not all of what we do, right? So I do want to share this slide to know that we are a thriving and contemporary group of people, and this is who we be Gullah Geechee. Okay. Now let's take the journey from being property to owning property. Okay. So how did Gullah Geechee people acquire land? Remember, we didn't get our 40 acres in a mule, right? So how did Gullah Geechee people acquire and how much? Legally. Okay. I don't know, there's this, it's interesting as I do more of this work, I encounter this belief that like Sherman's field order really happened, or, like Gullah Geechee people got something that we did not earn or pay for, which is very not true, right? There has been no reparations for anyone of African descent in the United States. So, how we got it was legally, okay? But more specifically, through direct purchase, right? So after the Civil War and at the end of Reconstruction, freed peoples of African descent, Gullah Geechee people, purchased land from planters who were eager to sell due to economic hardship after the war, right? The war decimated a lot of areas and a lot of plantations. And these traditions often took place, and these transactions, often took place right in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. There were land allotments in some cases where land was allotted to freed enslaved people by the government. That was on a state basis, not on a federal basis, and given in very, precarious circumstances. If we fast forwarded today, those families probably don't have that land, right? Through wills, gifts, bequeaths, there are stories of, former slaveholding families that loved their enslaved people, right? That did not have children of their own, or, no longer wanted to stay in the South. So they gifted land or bequeathed land at the time of their death, right? Also, there were, right near the end of the war, some slaveholding families that also they manumitted their slaves upon their death, right? Gave them freedom, in other words, as well as gave them land. We talked about homesteading, right? And inheritance, okay? So how land continues to pass today is inheritance, okay? Not reparations, I want to be very clear, okay? So, from owning property now to losing property, okay? Now we'll talk about the Vice News video. I want to ask who particular people were, okay? Who are the players and what are their roles? Who is this? Yes? Queen Quet. And we know she is not just the founder of the Gullah Geechee Sea Island Coalition, right? But she is the chiefess of the Gullah Geechee Nation and head of state. Who is this? Or describe his role, even if you don't remember his name. Anybody else? Yes?
Is he an heirs property lawyer?
He's an heirs property lawyer, correct. He is an attorney. He is the president of the Heirs Property Law Center of South Carolina. Great call. Who is this? Not my friend. Yes?
Is that some real estate guy?
Yeah, tell me more about him.
He's like trying to, or he came in and he bought land and he's part of the movement trying to build like resorts and golf courses.
Yeah. Is he Gullah Geechee?
No.
Yes. He is a descendant. Adolph Brown, he's a descendant of families, and what he did was essentially, right, come back, his family, had a ton of land, they had a lot of heirs, he swindled them in his own way, he explains very artfully out of it, and he's trying to convince other Gullah Geechee families to do the same because they're gonna develop it anyway, so you might as well get something out of it, right? Very important role, right, that we are not a monolith, right, and we're fighting with a lot of forces, many external, but some internal. And then who is this? Again, maybe just his role. Anyone? Yes.
He's an example of someone who's lived on the land and his family's lived on the land for hundreds of years, and he's trying to retain the property while everyone around him is being forced is selling it.
Correct, right? He's a resident. I think so often we think that you have to be a movement leader, right? Or you have to be like at the cutting edge. Some people are just living their lives, right? They're regular Gullah Geechee people who are concerned about wanting to keep their land and wanting others to keep their land around them and being concerned about the continuance, the sustainability of their traditions and their land, right? So I highlight him to say, everyone's not an activist, okay? Some people are living, but you can activate even if you're not an activist leader, right? This is a community activist, right? Mr. Greg Grant, who is well known in the area, and he is organizing with Gullah Geechee families on the ground, right? Hosting meetings, trying to make sure that families are paying their taxes on time, sharing tax-paying information, right? And other things that are needed to help the community. Okay. Now we'll talk about the legal ways that we are divested of land, right? Or dispossessed of land. First, tax hiking. Taxes go up and up and up and up and up, right? But the goods or services that those taxes are meant to pay for never appear. And so what you have is there's no real reason why taxes are going up and up. And that actually is a constitutional problem. Right? You have partition, which you all know very well.
Can I ask for, so
Sure.
with tax hiking, what happens is that when people fail to pay the taxes and then are subject to?
Yes. So then taxes go up and up and up to exorbitant rates, more than the native Gullah Geechee people can pay for. And yes, their land is forced to tax sale, right? There are all these tax certificates in some states and other things, but ultimately the end result is dispossession, right? And it's very systematic, it's very targeted, right? The lines are literally drawn in ways to make sure these people in this area go so we can build a resort, right? So we can build a hotel. We have eminent domain, which I don't think we've talked about yet. Okay. But we will in this class. Adverse possession and predatory practices. We'll talk more about these in the solutions. Okay. How big is the problem? Huge. Okay. Heirs property is a third of southern black-owned land. That's just not the Gullah Geechee Nation. That is all of the former slaveholding South. That's 3.5 million acres worth more than $28 billion. And this study was done in 2019. Okay, so we know that land value is worth way more now. That is what the land holdings that black families had was worth. Okay. Not having a will, as we know, passing things interstate, it does make land owning vulnerable to laws and loopholes that allow speculators and developers to acquire property. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has recognized this interstate passage as the leading cause of involuntary land loss among black communities. And between 1910 and 1997, there are some upgraded studies that I want to change with this slide, but we'll stick with the numbers because it shows how big it is and it's not trending better. Okay? That 90% of African Americans have lost their farm land, 3.5 million acres, over that time, increasing the wealth gap, right, by many, many, many thousands of multiples. Legal remedies, okay? If we've got tax hiking as a problem, then property tax relief or some kind of incentive program may be possible. Okay? If partition is a problem, there's something called the Uniform Partition of Heirs Property Act that has been passed by some states. I'm going to give you the cliff notes up front. Okay. All the act does is add friction to the process of heirs selling their family's property. It does not stop people from selling their family's property. Why not?
I guess you would still want someone to have the right to use of their property, and you can't really stop them from selling it.
It's theirs. It's theirs. Right? That would be a taking, right? Right, all the law does is add friction to the process because it can't stop heirs from taking, right? Essentially from their families. Then we have eminent domain, we'll talk about later, but there are regulations and ways to kind of stop that or address those issues. And then we think things like adverse possession and predatory practices, those fall within the legal bounds, right? Many of those things are legal, or they're legal so far as no one said it was illegal, right? Or people haven't brought claims to stop or challenge those predatory ways. So those ways may not be legal, but if no one enforces the law, right, and enforces ethics, then it is legal, right? So those are legal assistance and education programs are ways to stop this, but I'll tell you almost none of this is stopping the problem, right? And I'll ask you why. So one of the things that we can do about it is building trust. All right, trust. what could that mean in this context? Not just in a property context, right, but beyond a property context. There's mistrust with the Gullah Geechee community, right? So where could we build trust, and with whom? Yes.
So I just want to ask a question.
Sure.
Are we talking about mistrust specifically within the community, externally both?
Externally, right? Most Gullah Geechee people, right, are it's a very close-knit community, even up and down the coast, okay? The Adolph Browns exist, but notice, he didn't grow up in South Carolina, okay? He grew up in New York, right? That video is very important because it shows the archetypes that appear in every community, but everyone else pretty much except for him is down with the community, right? But we do have to be aware of that. But that's really an external ethic, right? Extremist ethic, right? Brought to our community, where members of our community perpetrate that against us. But notice, he did not grow up there. He doesn't really have a personal attachment, right, to the land. And that's why traditionalist culture is so important, right? Yes? Sure.
Yeah, I would say trust is one of the big places trust needs to be with the government. Obviously you have mistrust with the government because these people have been set, government's been kind of set against them since the start, since they're very bringing to America.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no trust. They have no reason to believe that the government is on their side. So trust needs to be built in that sense.
But with whom? All right, we say the government in general, but who from the government? Yes.
So just trying to sort of put myself in this situation, if I were in this situation, there is no trust I would be able to build with the current state, but I might have distrust of maybe lawyers who might be able to help empower members of the community to continue land ownership. So I think that maybe building trust with people who are also willing to fight against the dispossession.
Absolutely. Lawyers are very hard to come by in the Gullah Geechee Nation, especially ones that are going to help us, right? Who you saw, the lawyer who is the head of the Southern Heirs Property Center, he only works in South Carolina, but what about North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, right? So one of the issues is finding lawyers. I'll help you out. Judges, okay? Judges are the ones that are deciding these cases, right? Taking our property. We don't have much trust with judges in very small places. Judges often descend from slave-owning families, right? That may, believe it or not, have some kind of equity in divesting descendants of their family members. And these places are very small. Families know each other, okay? Everyone knows the judge's family because they've been judges and lawyers for a very long time, right? And so, there is mistrust with judges because they carry a certain last name that we know is a slave-owning last name. Think about county officials, right? Those that are collecting taxes on the local level are people of distrust, right? They control the places where we draw the lines to say this area will be, zoned differently, or this area will be targeted for tax hikes, right? So really think about not just the government as a whole, but it starts locally, right? And then there are a number of federal cases that we've also lost that are high-profile cases, right? To where it's wow, even the federal government doesn't have our backs. They can recognize us, but not recognize we have any place, right? Use the word trust because we have the Gullah Geechee Cultural Community Trust, right? Which is an organization that myself and two co-founders started in Florida and Southeast Georgia. One of the things that we want to do, right, is thinking about trust. Isn't there a legal term of trust? What is a trust? We don't know that yet? Okay. Well, as you journey through the course, right, think about this idea of trust, right? It will appear, but know that trust might be a way of collectively, right, using an organization to collectively ensure that property stays within a community, even if not with individuals, okay? And then we may not have time for discussion.
I wanted to make sure you have 5 minutes.
Great. We have discussion. So does anyone have any questions, comments? I'm very open. Yes.
You said Gullah Geechee is like stemmed from derogatory words. Is that like something I shouldn't say to people, or?
No. It has since been a term, right, that was vindicated. Back in the day, if you were Gullah or Geechee, you were from those islands, right, that were like just seen as like enslaved people that kept their enslaved like affect, right? So they talked really funny. Gullah Geechee is a distinct language and has dialects, right? So if you spoke in that way, it was considered backwards, right, or bad English, right? But now we understand that it actually is a language, right? It's a Creole language like many other Creole languages that evolved within, you know, the experience of enslavement and an identity, right?
Wait, I just want to say, can you go back to the slide where you have like the problems and some of the solutions? Maybe we can like help
Yes,
focus
yes.
some of our discussion about, yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I want to start by saying I really appreciate that you're here, and a lot of what you discussed resonates with me because I'm very adamant, and I think that I'm a strong proponent for reparations, specifically for African enslaved descendants, and so I love that you're here. But I wanted to ask, in your work and what you've seen so far, where are we at in the process? Are you guys still fighting for something like that? And in the future, what do you see coming from that fight?
I gotta check the number, okay, but I think it's HR 40, House Resolution 40 on the federal level, which was shepherded in by a lot of the very well-known African-American representatives and some senators. It hasn't gotten its Senate companion yet, but there is a law, right? And what the law would do, what HR 40 starts with doing, is creating a commission. These things are so complicated, right? And this is a very interesting legal point, that you've got millions of individuals that have been hurt by a system, right, that was in place for 400 years, right, since the beginning of the country. Whether we start with landing or founding or whatever, right? But and like you have so many people who have been torted that the government would recognize that it's a problem with its passage and creation of commission, but then say, okay, this is a problem, this is the money that we have to allot to fix that problem, because in the law we only fix problems with pretty much money, right? So this is the money of the treasury that we can allot to this problem. Can you do the due diligence of figuring out a process where you can take evidence and hear people and see that that's fair and investigate and blah, blah, blah. Which for many of us is more trauma, okay? I'm here. The fact that I'm here is a testament that I survived horrible things that you did to me. But now I gotta prove it, and this happened and that happened, but what if I can't? Many of us can't even, locate our families into the 1800s, right? Before the 1880 census, let alone 1890 census rather, let alone before then. So that's what the reparations bill would do. There are other proposals too. There's like corporate facing reparations, which is a private matter, and all these things, but there is a movement to repair. I will also say there are things beyond just reparations, right? We know there are other ways of remunerating people for systemic problems that the government and others have participated in. But it is very much alive and well. Every 2 years they redo it, okay? So we're about to end the Congress and start another one. They have to reintroduce it, right? But last year it actually got earlier this year I think, it got a lot of attention. And support building, right? Yes, Christy.
How would creating like the community land trust help prevent these needs of dispossession?
Yeah.
I don't really exactly understand how they function.
Yeah, without like teaching the law, I'm going to tell you, in general, what a land trust is.
Well, we can also say whatever that question, because we have just like a minute left. So.
Okay.
We will return to that, but if you want to talk about your organization.
Sure, I will. An organization, right, individuals can own land, organizations can own land. So thinking about, right, maybe I'm not on the deed, but maybe there is a trustee, right? Someone that I trust that holds it, helps me pay taxes or pays taxes on my behalf to make sure that I can stay here, right?
Got it.
The idea.
Makes sense.
One more question, and we should, and then you can stick around for a few minutes.
Sure.
If others want to keep talking.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask where you started for.
Yeah, okay. I've got a whole pitch about my company and stuff we're doing on the ground. I'll send that as well as I'll send info for the Gullah Geechee Culture Community Trust. I think that my slide right here, here's my email address. Yes, please. I'd love to stay in touch with you guys. And feel free to write me. There are specific things that you could do. My request of you, which was at the very end, is that right, the nonprofit and us, we need some legal research support, right? So there are some legal and policy questions that I would love to guide people through. And that is really one of the tangible things that I can ask of you. So if you get in touch with me, maybe we can talk about stuff. Yeah.
And then I think you have to leave the room, but you can stick around outside.
Yeah, I'll be in the hallway.
Okay, and yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.